So now I've switched from the PowerPoint to the PDF because for some reason I lost all my thetas and it was making me sad. So I need to establish the identity sine squared of negative theta minus cosine squared of negative theta over sine squared of negative theta minus cosine of negative theta equals what I have here on the right. Ooh, I get to grade in pink now. How exciting. Okay, so if I have sine squared theta because sine is odd, I can move that negative to the front. So I have negative sine of theta squared minus cosine of negative theta, which is even, so that becomes a positive. So I've got minus cosine squared theta all over, moving this to the front, negative sine of theta minus cosine of, again, theta. Now that numerator, that sign's going to cancel out, right? That negative is going to cancel out, so I'm just left with a positive sine squared theta. Now I look at this numerator and I think, that's a difference of squares. So I can factor that. That gives me sine of theta plus cosine of theta times sine of theta minus cosine of theta. Now let's look at our denominator. Our denominator has something going on that makes math professors say ooh, and that's negative leading coefficients. So let's pull out that negative. So I have negative sine of theta plus cosine of theta. And remember that this right here is where we're trying to get. So my sine of theta plus cosine of theta, that's going to cancel. I'm left with sine of theta over a negative 1, so that becomes negative sine of theta minus cosine of theta. So we're getting closer, but it doesn't quite look like what I've highlighted in yellow. That gives me, if I distribute the negative, that gives me negative sine of theta plus cosine of theta, and I can rearrange to get it to look like what I've highlighted in yellow. So I have cosine of theta minus sine of theta. So that was example 4. Let's scroll up to example 5. So example 5, again, we're still working on establishing these identities. I have 1 plus sine of theta over 1 plus cosecant of theta equals sine of theta. So I'm going to take 1 plus sine of theta over 1 plus cosecant of theta, and I'm going to rewrite this using in terms of only sine and cosine. So now I have 1 plus sine of theta over 1 plus cosecant of theta, which is 1 over sine of theta. Now I need to write this denominator as a single fraction. So I can rewrite 1 as sine of theta over sine of theta. So I have 1 plus sine of theta in my numerator. And then in my denominator, I have sine of theta over sine of theta plus 1 over sine of theta. So that gives me 1 plus sine of theta divided by sine of theta plus 1 over sine of theta. Now I'm going to go ahead and divide this. When I divide by a fraction, I keep the first fraction the same. I change from division to multiplication, and I flip this second fraction. This we're going to flip. We're going to take the reciprocal. So I have sine of theta over sine of theta plus 1, which I'm going to rewrite sine of theta plus 1 as 1 plus sine of theta, because that makes my life so much easier. Oh no, I lost my pink. So I have 1 plus sine of theta. My 1 plus sine of theta is cancel, and I'm left with just sine of theta. Like, doesn't that look so much nicer than this hot mess? Let's take a look at example 6. So I have sine of theta over 1 plus cosine theta plus 1 plus cosine theta over sine of theta equals 2 cosecant of theta. So we're going to start with what we have on the left and somehow get to what we have on the right. So I have sine of theta, 1 plus cosine theta plus 1 plus cosine theta over sine of theta. And remember, we're adding, so we can't just cancel out all these sines and cosines. we need to find the LCD, and the LCD of this, because these denominators have no factors in common, the LCD is going to be 1 plus cosine theta times sine theta. So on the left here, I'm going to multiply by sine of theta over sine of theta. On the right here, I'm going to multiply by 1 plus cosine theta over 1 plus cosine theta. Now we're just going to focus on adding these before we can simplify them any further. So I have sine squared theta plus 1 plus cosine of theta squared over sine of theta 1 times 1 plus cosine theta. So let's go ahead, because I can't see anything else I can do right now, and FOIL out this part right here. We're going to FOIL out our cosine. So I'm going to take sine squared of theta plus 1 plus 2 cosine theta plus cosine squared theta all over sine squared theta. Nope, not over sine squared theta, just a sine of theta times 1 plus cosine of theta. Now, I'd like to combine like terms in my numerator, but I don't see any I can combine. So let's think about something else. Let's think about the fact that if I have sine squared theta plus cosine squared theta, that equals 1. That's one of our Pythagorean identities. So if I have sine squared theta plus cosine squared theta, I could replace that with a 1. That would look so much nicer. So now I have, down here on your left, 1 plus 1 plus 2 cosine theta over sine of theta times times 1 plus cosine theta. That equals 2 plus 2 cosine of theta over sine of theta times 1 plus cosine of theta. And now I'm wondering, what should I do next? Well, if I look at that numerator, I can see that there's a factor of 2 I could factor out. So I have 2 times 1 plus cosine theta over sine of theta times 1 plus cosine of theta. Ooh, my cosine theta is now cancel. My 1 plus cosine theta is now cancel. So I have 2 over sine of theta. Well, let's remember that 2, this can be written as 2 times 1 over sine of theta. What's 1 over sine of theta? Cosine. So I have 2 cosecant theta. Final answer.